And I must say that I personally feel responsible for this, and I'm trying to do as much as I can to present these. I believe are still important, inspiring, actual, also today. So that's why when I was invited to open by my lecture our meeting, I thought, what can I do? I will speak about something that I studied, that I'm interested in. So I will try to give you my own perspective of some fragments of Polska New Theatre. But because my education and my beginnings are historical, I'm a theatre historian by the education. I slowly moved towards other fields. Now I'm the professor of performance studies at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, working mostly, but not only, on social and cultural performances. But at the very beginning I was just a theatre historian. I was working on the 19th century art of actor in Poland. Later I wrote 2 books about the tradition of Polish theatre. The first one is a Polish theatre of transformation, and the second one is Teatr Polskie Historie, Theatres of Poland, the Histories. Both I'm showing these books as a kind of, self-promotion, because these books hopefully will be published in English next year. Oh, let's see, next and maybe in 2017. So it would be against myself to start to talk about Polska New Theatre, Polish New Theatre, without relating it to the traditions of the past. So at the very beginning, I think that it's not unrational. It's not something against the idea of our meeting to give you some outline of a tradition, because many artists of contemporary Polish theatre are still somehow fighting with the tradition and working with tradition in mind and in relation to tradition, also working against it. And I also think that it's not my point of view is a little bit different from the directors of Polski Theatre, because I think that when we live our tradition, especially this romantic one, and we'll say, okay, it's anachronistic, we should go, we should move, we should start to work with something new, then it's not left behind, because there are people who will take this tradition, and really they took it from us. And they are using it in a very wrong way, in a very bad way, and they are using it to create something that means the catastrophe for our culture. So I'm strongly against living our tradition, especially the romantic one, living it to nationalists, living it to xenophobes, living it to the people to conservative politicians who are using it as a weapon against others and against people who could use it in their own way. And the other aspect of this subject that I chosen to share with you is that, in my opinion, Polish theatre tradition is something quite exceptional, because, and this is the thesis of the first part of my lecture today, is that the core of this tradition is contemporary. It's a paradox that 200 years ago our artists created such kind of works for theater that not only were developed in new theater forms in 20th century, but still could be used as a strong inspiration for contemporary avant-garde experimental artists. And also, I'm the deputy director of the Theatre Institute, and we are suffering through this year, 2015. We are suffering because we are the organizers of the events connected to this anniversary of founding of the first public, stable, professional Polish theater that happened on 19th November 1765, so 250 years ago. We propose to celebrate this year as a year of public theater. There is a debate in Poland why it's not the anniversary of the founding of national theater. Why you are hiding national? We are not hiding national, of course. It's also the starting point for the national theater, especially the National Theater in Warsaw. But at the same time, and for us it's very important, it's the starting point for public theater. The theater that is a part of a public debate, the theater that is an important part of public sphere. And we are really convinced that this aspect of theater, to be open for public debate, to be the part of public debate, important partner, important actor of the public sphere, that nowadays it's very important, and that we should recall it, we should strengthen it by celebrating this anniversary, saying that for 250 years Polish theater has been an important player in the field of the public debates in the public sphere, and still it should be, and still its mission to serve the public sphere. So also because of that, I felt a little obliged to talk to you about the past, about the tradition, but not only about tradition. Don't be afraid that I'm going to speak about Polska Old Theater. It will be just a part of my lecture, just to outline, to sketch for you the ground, the fundamentals, the sources of this special situation of Polish theater. Polish theater belongs to the great family of European theaters and world theaters, of course, and it's open to the world, and it's dealing with important subjects, important global subjects, of course, but still its starting point is, in my opinion, different than starting points and traditions in many other European countries. So let's come back for a while to the end of the 18th century and to the starting point, 19th November of 1765, when the king Stanisław August founded the first Polish theater company. Of course, to be sincere, we are celebrating this day, but all of us know very well that this theater was not stable. It lasted for years and then it was closed, then reopened again. It was not so professional. In fact, there were amateurs taken from different amateur theaters, from noble houses, from king's servants, and so on. It was not so national, in fact, because by the times national meant just simply that they spoke Polish on the stage, but it was public. This aspect, I think, it's correct. It was public because it was open to the public. You can just buy a ticket and enter the room. And from the very beginning, the idea of this theater was to create an institution that will be an important part of the public debate. The king, Stanisław August, was inspired by the ideas of Enlightenment. He tried to reform the state, but also he was a modern man, knowing very well that he had to think about public relations, about the way of communicating his ideas to the public. He had no TV, no internet, he had only theater. Of course, he had newspapers, and he also, by the same time as founding the first Polish theater, he also organized the first Polish modern newspaper. So he took care of media, and for him, theater was a medium of promoting his ideas, fighting against all these conservative notions that were against him. So he paid for this theater to change the social world, to change the society of Poland. So this is the starting point for this stable state, and so on, and so on, and so on. These times when Polish theater was founded was a very hard time for the state. The state was in a very deep crisis. Soon it felt under the influence of our mighty neighbors. Poland is squeezed between almighty neighbors of Germany, Russia. By the time also Austria was our neighbor. And slowly these new emerging powers worked on destroying Poland. They succeeded in 1795. Poland was destroyed. It was divided. Its territory was divided between these three countries. All of our neighbors took some part of Poland. The state collapsed, and Poland lost its independence for more than 100 years. Of course, Poles all the time were fighting to regain this independence. They were organizing patriotic plots. There were a series of uprising, military actions, civil wars, and so on and so on. All the heroic history of our country lasting more than 100 years. But theater, by the time, was one of the most important center of the fight for Polish identity and the survival of Polish culture. The National Theatre was founded in 1765, but in fact it was born as the national, not only by the name but also by the character, by this guy, Wojciech Bogusławski, who is called the father of Polish National Theatre. He was the dramatist, the actor, singer, stage director, entrepreneur of National Theatre, the artist of the theatre in a sense that Edward Gordon Craig thought about many years later. He knew everything about theatre, and he also was very talented as someone who listens to the public. I think that his genius and the way he became the father of Polish theatre is based on his talent to listen to the public, what public needs. It was the time of a strong pressure of classics. The classics, neoclassical movement or neoclassical stream in Polish theatre was very, very strong. Bogusławski opposed it, saying that theatre is so important in Poland because it can be the active partner of a dialogue with the society. And to be in dialogue with the society, the theatre needs the new language and needs to invent the language that will be understood by the people. So he, in fact, he was against this classical convention of neoclassical tragedy, and he proposed the theatre that is based on some popular genres, not these classical ones. His most famous work, and in fact the first Polish national and political performance, the slide over there shows the scene from it. It was called Krakowiacy i Górale, and it was a singspiel. The performance with songs, when you read it nowadays, you will not understand why it was so important, because it's some simple story of lovers who overcome the obstacles to be together. But in fact, because of the songs, in quite Brechtian way, the songs were sung to the public, and it was possible to change the text of the songs. So they were actualized. So they commented not on the story of a drama, but they commented on the actual events, on the actual circumstances of social life in Poland. So Bogusławski invented this tool of using modern, for his times, modern drama and modern theatre to communicate with the people without censorship, omitting the censorship, because the censorship by the authorities by the time was very strong. So he created all tactics to be in a living dialogue with his audience. But still, there was this notion that, of course, everywhere were convinced that theatre is very important as a tool of communicating with the society, inspiring the society, changing their minds, and so on. But still, this classical idea of universal models of theatre was very strong. The classics were saying, to prove that our nation, that Poland, is culturally strong, we must create our version of classical tragedy and classical comedy. We cannot only perform the French ones or German ones, we should perform our own. We should show the world, yes, we also can make it, we can present our tragedy, and of course classical one. And this will be the proof of our strength. The problem was that theater in Poland was organized according to the model that was by the time universal, so European universal model, let's say, invented in France and Germany. And this model was really present in all the countries of Europe. So you could go to Paris, to Vienna, even to St. Petersburg, and you will see almost the same, nearly the same dramas performed in nearly the same way. The problem was that the language of Enlightenment was inspired with this idea of universal language, universal values, universal conventions. For Poland, it was dangerous because this universal language was the language of our enemies. Germans, Russians, Austrians were using this language. So when we start to talk with it, we lost our own. And this was the real danger of losing our own language, our own culture, our own identity. So new generation of poets, new generation of artists opposed this idea. And here we are in the sources of Polish theater. In 1823, Adam Mickiewicz, by the time quite famous and popular young poet of Romantic times, published his second volume of poetry. And it was a huge event because Mickiewicz was considered to be one of the most talented young artists writing in Polish language. And in this volume there was a drama called The Forefather's Eve, or in Polish, Dziady. The English translation is not so good because in fact you cannot translate Dziady. It has so many meanings in Polish that translating it simply into The Forefather's Eve cuts many aspects of his title. He used, in creating this drama, Mickiewicz used inspiration taken from folk culture. He published in 1823, he published two parts of the drama, two fragments, the second part and the fourth part. The second part is based on the folk ritual of calling of the dead. Mickiewicz, even in the introduction to the drama, written something like that this folk ritual that he saw and that he's using resembles somehow the ancient rituals of Greece, and he meant the Dionysiac rituals. And also it resembles somehow some rituals performed in the islands of the New World, and he meant Haiti, saying that, yeah, it's a kind of Polish voodoo. He had some knowledge about voodoo, exactly, because Polish soldiers went to Haiti with Napoleon. And when they came back to Poland, and some of them published their relation, they were witnessing some voodoo rituals. So Mickiewicz knew something about it. So he used this folk tradition, saying that when we are looking for something that will help us to preserve, or rather, I would say rather construct or reconstruct Polish identity, we should use something that is folk and inspired by Romantic philosophy. Mickiewicz was quite convinced that folk culture is closer to the sources, closer to the roots. So he took this root ritual and used it to create a very sophisticated drama, in fact. In the fourth part, he created another kind of performance. I'm not going to go deeper into it. The fact is that later, in 1832, Mickiewicz wrote another part, the third one, proposing another kind of performance, because in fact the third part is a kind of documentary drama based on real historical events in which Mickiewicz took part himself. He was jailed by Russians, and he's using this story as a plot in his new drama, but at the same time, as a documentary drama, the third part of The Forefather's Eve is also a kind of mystical, ritualistic drama of transformation, quite complicated and very, very, very deep. This work, this drama, The Forefather's Eve, was very soon recognized as something that creates the new national identity. In fact, Poles believed in what Mickiewicz proposed in the Forefathers. There is one scene in the third part when one of the characters, of course it's a priest, is seeing future. And he delivers a long speech, so-called vision of a revealed Peter, because his name is Peter. He sees the future of Poland, and he gives the explanation why Poland is suffering, saying that Poland is a Christ of the nations. And Poles believe in it. You can think about it whatever you want, but the fact is that the nation believed in the vision and the explanation given by the fictional theater character. They really, reading this drama, many Poles were thinking or feeling, experiencing that the poet is giving them the actual prophecy. So of course, this prophecy was not fictional anymore. It became the root, the core of Polish national identity. And I think that this situation is exceptional. You have the text for the theater in which you find the core of national identity, and it really was developed during our history many times, re-performed, reconstructed, reinterpreted, and so on, and so on, and so on. This work, The Forefathers' Eve, is exceptional also because Mickiewicz proposed the different forms of theater. In fact, you can tell the whole story, and I try to do this in my book. You can tell all the history of Polish theater, all most important ideas, projects, achievements of Polish theater artists, starting from The Forefathers' Eve. Because there is the inspiration, the starting point for the theater of transformation, for the theater of death of Tadeusz Kantor, of course, for all the ritualistic drama, for political theater, for documentary theater, for rhapsodic theater in most contemporary sense of this word. When you read the book from Jean-Paul Sarrazak about the rhapsodic theater, you can find it in Forefathers' Eve. In fact, the famous post-dramatical theater of Hans T. Schliemann was written by Mickiewicz in The Forefathers' Eve. So I'm always saying, why post-dramatic? We have post-dramatic, dramatic work written in 1923, so come on. Maybe Germans have post-dramatical theater, we have our theater post-dramatical in our classical works. The problem with it, and with all the, because during the Romantic times there was an explosion of fantastic texts for theater. Besides Mickiewicz, there is Juliusz Słowacki, a fantastic poet and drama writer. I'm always repeating this when I'm speaking in English, so I will repeat it once more. There are 5 great dramatists of the Western world. 5 of them. William Shakespeare, Pedro Calderón de la Barca, Antoni Chekhov, Samuel Beckett, Juliusz Słowacki. We can discuss Chekhov and Beckett. Maybe you can discuss Calderón. But Shakespeare and Słowacki are not questionable, in my opinion. Because Słowacki is, as a drama writer, as a drama artist, he's so great in a way of, he creates the dramatical world, thinking from different points of view. His technique, his drama technique is incredible. There were also some other important people writing for theater, writing dramas like Cyprian Norwid, like Zygmunt Krasiński. Most of their dramas are really pioneer ones. They are experimental. They are not using the old conventions of the Western drama. They are creating the new. Stanisław Wyspiański at the end of 19th century. The problem was that none of them, almost none of them, could work practically on the stage. Because of political reasons, they were immigrants, they were living in France, living abroad. These works could not be performed in Poland because of censorship, and so on and so on. There's one factor. The other factor was that they were too modern. They were too innovative, too experimental, and from the point of view of 19th century theater, these works were unstageable. The idea was that, that's a beautiful poetical works, but they didn't know theater, these people, Mickiewicz and Słowacki, they didn't know theater, so we cannot perform them in theater. They are, poetical visions. But from the perspective of Polish culture, they were so important that theater people all the time were trying to look for the ways of staging them. When Poland regained its independence at the beginning of the 20th century, theater artists felt that their mission is to work on staging this canonical romantic drama, and the common notion was that we should use avant-garde, innovative, experimental ways of performing, of directing, of working with actors to do this. It was a historically unbelievable combination of factors. On one hand, we have this tradition, very important for the national identity and so on, very beautiful, highly regarded. And on the other hand, we have artists who are the avant-garde of the avant-garde, saying that we should use the most contemporary, innovative avant-garde methods of creating the theater performance to look for the proper ways of staging our national canon. In all other European countries, the avant-garde was working on emergings with some experimental works, sometimes very defined, reinterpreted classics. In our case, it was absolutely different because Leon Schiller, who staged For a Father's Eve using the cubistic stage design and very experimental ways of working with the crowds, he was a very modern experimental, very talented director. He was working in Polish National Theatre, Teatr Polski in Warsaw, in Vivid and so on, in the mainstream. So our avant-garde is in the mainstream of our national theatre. And it was one of the most important movements in Polish culture of the time. Schiller was convinced that you can perform the For a Father's Eve and other romantic drama using the avant-garde stage design and working as a director. The other great artists of Polish theatre of the first half of the century, Juliusz Osterwa, Mieczysław Limanowski, who founded the first Polish theatre laboratory called Reduta, the studio theatre, they were convinced that, yeah, the stage design and the work of director, it's very important, but in fact you cannot create a new national, new Polish theatre style without the actors. So they focused on the work of the actor. They created the Actors Laboratory, Actors Studio, inspired somehow by Stanisławski, but developing their own methods of work, and they were starting point for this guy, for Jerzy Grotowski and his laboratory theatre. In fact, Grotowski, in his own ways, continued this work on new style of acting, new method of acting that's rooted in romantic tradition. Again, we have this explosion of new theatre in 20s and 30s of the 20th century. Then there was a cut because of the Second World War that destroyed most of our theatre. Then we had this huge period of 50 years of communist rule, under which theatre was developing, was growing enormously. Especially in 1970s, Polish theatre got to his peak. It became one of the most important theatre cultures in the world, with Grotowski, with Kantor, with Konrad Swinarski, with Polish avant-garde theatre of young artists working at the universities, many other factors, many other things, many other achievements. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm finishing this historical part, slowly moving to today. What I would like to stress as a conclusion of it is that when we think about Polish theatre tradition, we must remember that it's not something that is far, far away from us, that it's historical, anachronistic. All the time, this tradition is working again and again, giving the inspiration for the new ways of doing theatre. Still, it's troubling us, it's troubling Polish artists. You know, when you think about tradition in I would say, let's create a kind of artificial model of typical drama theater. Typical drama theater has this notion of staging the important drama works as it were written, or faithfully, being faithful to the author. This is the idea of, let's say, conventional drama theater, or traditional drama theater. In Poland, it's impossible. When someone is saying that he or she would like to stage the Forefathers' Eve as it was written, I'm asking a very simple question. What is the order of the parts? Because the author, Adam Mickiewicz, wrote it like this. First, in 1923, he wrote the second and the fourth part. Then he wrote the third one. So, as it was written, second, fourth, and third. But the numbers are in different order, because he wrote second, third, and fourth. Which order do you choose? The order of a time, second, fourth, third, or the order of the numbers, second, third, fourth. This is the simple trick that Mickiewicz used, and I think that's why he was a genius, because it's a very simple trick, making it impossible to stage the Forefathers' Eve as it was written, because it was written in two different opposing ways. And you must choose which way, which order you will use in your performance. So at the very beginning, you cannot stage the Forefathers' Eve as it was written. Because the Forefathers' Eve is not the work of art that was done to repeat, reconstruct, and so on. It was done as a calling for the artist. You must think, you must act, you must do it for yourself, in your own name, in your own way. There is no other way of doing this. You must choose. So, this is the tradition of Polish theater. The tradition of Polish theater, in fact, all the most important work. Of course, we have enormous number of conventional drama. Don't create the legend that all Polish theater is so innovative, but the most important ones, and this is the point, the crucial works of Polish theater, the crucial works of Polish culture, are created as a calling for the people to come to present their own versions, to reinterpret them, to relive them in their own way. Osterwa has this idea, like creating Reduta, that we must repeat the act of creation. We must not repeat the score. We have to repeat the act of creation. So you must work with this text in such a way that it would be your experience, that you will relive in them, and that you will recreate them, but as you, man or woman, living in these certain times, in these certain conditions. So all the time, this is the calling. So you must work for yourself. And for many times, it was done like that. And something happened at the end of 20th century. Because after the martial law, after the end of communism, it was dull and dark times. But when they finished in 1989, when communism fell down, we start this process of transformation, of becoming a liberal, democratic state with free market capitalism and so on and so on and so on. And by the time, Polish theater fell into kind of deep crisis. Because all these political aspects of it, Polish theater was very good on making politics, of staging their illusions, of fighting with authorities and so on and so on. But when it finished, Polish theater people didn't know what to do. So there were times of looking for some new ways of doing theater. Only one director, Jerzy Grzegorzewski in Polish National Theatre, tried to use again reinterpretation of Polish classics as a way of communicating with the audience, but the audience was not interested. In fact, Grzegorzewski made many beautiful performances, but in fact, only the small group of people were interested in it, because all the nation was doing different things, making businesses, looking for the new ways of living, and so on and so on and so on. This crisis was overcame by Christian Lupa and his pupil, who changed the set of questions. In fact, Lupa and his colleagues and his students, among them Grzegorz Jarzyna and Krzysztof Warlikowski, started to make theater very important, very beautiful performances around new set of questions, focused on individuality, focused on individual problems, not on the problems of society. Theater that was going very deeply into the personal experiences, using some kind of psychoanalytical tools, going deeper and deeper into the problems of individual. At the same time, raising questions that were never asked, or rather, I would say, that were hidden somehow in these traditional sets of text for theaters, especially the questions of gender, the questions of sexuality. This was the subject that was introduced by this new theater, and many performances were dealing with this set of problems, questions, and so on, but were never related to all this romantic tradition. Of course, you can find many interesting inspirations also for these problems, but it was never staged like this. So Warlikowski, Lupa, Jarzyna started this new, I would say, rather focused on individual drama. Of course, many important questions, many important new subjects, and maybe it's good to say that also the new form of theater, new kind of theater, and now the other stage was created by the feminist movement in Polish theater. Very important, very strong. Agata Daniecka will speak about it on Sunday, so I'm just giving you the signal that there is this important wave of feminist theater, really proposing new subjects, new questions. But slowly after the years, we again started to work on our tradition, and I would say that nowadays, in this and previous theater season, we have some kind of return of classics. And this is the photo from the performance of The Forefathers Eve by Michał Zadara, one of the most important theater directors in Poland nowadays, who works, especially in last years, who works on Polish classics. Somehow I'm partly responsible for it, not as myself, but as a part of an initiative that came from the Theatre Institute and Ministry of Culture. It is a competition called The Living Classics, the competition for Polish theatres for the performances of the Polish drama of the past. This year we organized for the first time such a competition. We are, on one hand, we are paying for some chosen performances of our classics, and on November there will be the results of the competition will be announced. And I must say, because the competition is now going to its final, that we managed to inspire Polish theatre to work on classics again. Michał Zadara performances are, I think, a good example of this return of the classics. Because Michał proposed, for example, in The Forefathers Eve, he proposed that he will perform the whole text for the first time. In fact, The Forefathers Eve is so long and so complicated that no one ever performed it in its entirety. It was always cut, edited, and so on. Zadara said, I will perform the whole text. It will happen next year on November, and it is said that the whole performance will last 9 hours. Now we have two parts of it. One of it is based on the second and the fourth part. It lasts 4 hours and a half, something like that. But when you are expecting some classical, canonical mise en scène, it's not the case, as you see on this picture, because this is a picture of the girl who is a kind of bucolic shepherdess, very subtle and charmful, and Zadara staged it like that, hanging on this. in a very grotesque way, because he's using the whole text, but he uses very different methods of staging. And the staging is quite contemporary. In one scene you can see the Polish policeman. There are some allusions to pop culture, to Twin Peaks, for example, to popular series. So he is using the whole text. On one hand, he's faithful, and on the other hand, in his staging, he is reinterpreting this drama, proposing his own way of reading it, looking for ways of communicate with modern, contemporary, young audience. And it worked. I would say that not all this, not the whole performance, in my opinion, is very, very good, but it was really, the reaction of the audience is very good. There are no tickets for the performance, the room is full, people are reacting in a very live way. It's, by no means, it's conventional classical dull interpretation of the classics. So somehow it worked, and in some points also Zadara is reinterpreting the classical text, proposing very contemporary allusions to the social life in Poland. So all this is a kind of reinterpretation. But what I would try to present in the next part of this talk is there are different strategies and tactics used by Polish directors while working on classical drama. One of these is radical reinterpretation, using the classical text as a sparring partner, a strong text that is used by the director, but in such a way that he or she proposes or introduces new accents, new forces, new symbols, creating a kind of inner conflict inside the performance. One of the directors that are proposing this strategy and using this strategy for many years is Jan Klata, now the director of the National Old Theatre in Kraków, but he started his career in Gdańsk. And his first great success was the performance called The Age, based on Hamlet by William Shakespeare. And what is specific about it is that it was staged in a former shipyards in Gdańsk, the famous shipyards in Gdańsk, the cradle of the Solidarity movement. After the transformation, the shipyard was abandoned, almost ruined, and destroyed. And Klata put his Hamlet inside this shipyard. And it was a site-specific performance, because he used the spaces of the shipyard in Gdańsk, knowing that the audience, and of course he himself and his artist, are very conscious that this is the place, the historical place. Here Solidarity movement was born. But Klata staged his Hamlet as a play of his generation, as a drama of his generation. The children of the transformation, the children of the new Poland, people who were born at the end of communist rule and were growing up with the transformation. His Hamlet is on one hand based or put inside this historical site, the shipyard. So the memory of Solidarity and all what happened here is present, and they are playing with it. But at the same time, this place is haunted by the ghost of the past. At some scene, the father of Hamlet, the old King Hamlet, or the ghost of the king, appears on a horse wearing the armor of a Polish knight of 17th century. As a ghost of noble past, the great knight who now comes to these poor people who are tasting expensive wines and enjoying all the privileges of a new capitalism in Poland. And the question stated very strongly, posed very strongly by this performance was what we did with our history, what we did with our past. Did we forget everything? Did we forget all these noble, beautiful traditions of solidarity. What happened to our noblemen? Where are we? Are we just people buying expensive French wines and posing to be the new Europeans who are delighted by all these privileges of a new bourgeois class? And I think the diagnosis was like that. Yes, the new Poland is a Poland of a new bourgeois. So what can you do with it? How can you live with these values? And this was the question of the Hamlet. How can you live in such a world with such values, with this ghost of a father coming from the past and asking for revenge? And this is the question that Klata is asking many times in his performances. What is very interesting, he is not mocking the tradition, he is not attacking the tradition. Sometimes he uses the strategy of parody, but all the time he is very sensible to the values of traditional identity, of Polish culture, and so on. One of his most successful performances was the Trillian Trilogy, done in Krakow in 2009, based on a famous historical novels by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Again, it's one of the most important work of literature in the history of Polish culture. But he staged it like that all the heroes, the history is the history of a nobleman fighting for Poland. All these, in the book, these heroes are young, beautiful, very brave, all the heroical aspects are present. But Klata staged it like that they are old, grotesque, ugly, and they all are hidden in a kind of lunatic hospital. Or they're shelter for elderly. And they are telling the story. The story is taken from the book, performing them as a dream or as a game played by these elderly or ill people. So it was grotesque, it was kind of parody, but at the same time, and it was very important, at certain points, at certain moments, it was very serious. And Klata managed to have this balance between parody, between attacking, reinterpreting, mocking the tradition, and showing its values, showing that there was something incredibly important, something very strong in what we did in our history. One of the most risky scenes of the performance was the scene that I call the tribute to the Holy Virgin. In the book of Sienkiewicz, there is a scene in which one of the characters went to the monastery in Częstochowa, where there is a famous icon of Black Madonna, of the Holy Mary, and in certain point, this scene was performed in Klata's performance like that, but there was an actress with her face in place of the face of Madonna. So for some people it was a shock, because you have this holy icon, and in a certain point there is an actress speaking to one of the characters, saying, "Yes, you should fight for Poland. You are a brave one. Yes, you will do it." Then they are paying a kind of tribute to her, and when you look at it for the first time, you think it's a joke, and a kind of blasphemic joke, in fact. But when you think about it correctly, it's no blasphemy. It's a kind of performative showing, the way of showing the naivety of Polish Catholicism, which is like that. We call Madonna our mother, and she is the Pole, of course. She speaks Polish. She is with us. So they are treating her like that. And she says, "Okay, come on, my children. Yeah, we will make it. You are good. Be brave. We will manage." So and it was quite seriously done. As you see on this picture, the actors were not mocking; they were singing this hymns for the Madonna in a very serious way, very emotionally moving. And this is something important for Klata, that when you look at it, it's a parody, but at the same time there is a serious emotion arising by the performances. Klata became, in 2014, he became the director of the National Old Theatre in Krakow. He suffered many problems as a director. There is a strong opposition against the guy who has the punk hair and wears the black jacket, and he is the director of a national theater. He made also some mistakes, but the story is quite complicated, and I don't have time to tell it to you. But he continues his strategy of working with Polish tradition in this way that he tries to balance what is parody, attack, radical reinterpretation, and what is a kind of compassion, understanding. His version of King Ubu that premiered a year ago in Krakow, as you see on the picture, it's absolutely grotesque. The costumes, the stage design, of course, this is the Iron Throne of Poland, made of pipes, water pipe, destroyed one. So everything is very poor, very badly made, and was, of course, on purpose. He is showing Poles, because as you know, Ubu put his drama in Poland or nowhere. So Klata stages it as a performance about Poland or nowhere. The people are trying to be heroic, to perform some historical deeds. They try to act like the great heroes of great stories. So that's why the Iron Throne, the Game of Thrones, it's a kind of Game of Thrones. But it's very poorly, it's very, when you look at it, you feel ashamed. When you look for this, they are great actors, and they are wearing these costumes, and they are performing some silly jokes, like taken from silly sitcom. So it causes a kind of an impression of shame. But at the same time, at some scenes, you feel that despite all of this, there is a kind of understanding, a kind of compassion for these poor people who were thrown by someone into this historical battle, and they are trying to be brave enough. They are trying to achieve what they see as the goal of all this history. They cannot. They are too weak. They are too stupid. They are very stupid, really. All this is so stupid. But at the same time, they try and they suffer, and the suffering is somehow serious. This performance was not acclaimed. It's not a very great success, especially with the critics. The reviews were rather bad, but I saw it 3 times, and I think there is some kind of very clever, I would even say very wise, relation to the tradition. Klata is not pretending that he thinks that the whole Polish historical and cultural past is great. But he feels that there is something inside that we are not able to throw away, that to neglect all of this, it would be our mistake. And as I said at the beginning, I'm very convinced that this is the case. Klata also invited, as a director of Old Theatre in Krakow, Klata also invited some important young actors to work with him, among them Monika Strzemka and Paweł Demirski, the duo that is now considered to be one of the most important artists of Polish theatre, that is politically and socially engaging, very critical, very radical in their performances. They are doing performances of different types, dealing many times with contemporary problems, sometimes very specific ones. But in Krakow, they made 2 performances that are a very good examples of these tactics of being in relation to the tradition, in relation to the past. First of them is called the Warsaw Battle 1920, and it's a kind of recycling or restaging of a movie, a blockbuster supported by the state under the same title, the Warsaw Battle 1920. The Warsaw Battle 1920 is a famous battle with Soviet army. Now with our new historical policy, it's a crucial moment in Polish history. The legend goes that we stopped the Soviet barbarians for entering the Europe. We suffered, we died, many people died to stop this barbaric invasion of Soviets. This film was done like that. It was very mythical. It was created as a kind of legend, supported by the state, of course. And Demirsky, as a writer, and Strzemka as a director, because that's how they work, they restage it, but in totally different way. And it's very interesting how they work with the past, with the history, with the historical material, because they used almost the same historical material as was used for the movie, but they took and staged and put the accent on all of this that was removed by the screenwriter of the movie. Because there are many different aspects of the whole history. As usual, history is so complicated that you never can be truly faithful to the history. Sometimes it's always lost. So they took all that was thrown away by the makers of the movie, and they recycled this material. So they really took the garbage, the historical garbage, and used it again, proposing a different interpretation, different narration of the same history, showing that it was not a heroical act, but it was very complicated, and that the relation to the different groups of society towards the Soviet invasion, towards the Marshal Piłsudski, who was the leader of the battle, and so on and so on. But there were many very different aspects that were hidden, that they were deleted from our common memory by the makers of the movie, and of course by the state who supported it. I would say that I would call this strategy the strategy of destratification, or recycling. As Josette Ferral proposed, recycling as the idea for the theater of using the used material, using it again in different ways. And Demirsky and Strzemka doing it like that. For example, many times they are recalling the scenes from the movie. This photo shows the fragment of a performance in which Krzysztof Globisz is telling the story of the death of the priest called Skorupka, who died during the battle. In the movie, it's a very heroic scene. Under the attack, the priest stood up with the cross in his hand, saying, "Now, people, we should move in the name of God, in the name of our country, we should attack the Russians." And the people stood up, but of course the priest is shot, so in the movie he falls down in a slow motion, and there is a particular choir singing of angels taking his soul to the heaven. Demirsky and Strzemka staged it like that. The actor, quite old one, not the young, beautiful priest as in the movie, is sitting on the couch and telling the very simple story. But everyone panicked. They were young soldiers fighting with the fear of death blocking their bodies, with soldiers vomiting from the fear. And he, knowing that they are obliged to stop, to continue the battle. So he said, he was thinking, yes, I know I'm going to die, but we have to do this. So I stood up and I called them, "Boys, let's go, we should fight." And they went, and then I was shot. And he's saying this story in a very simple voice, very calmly. And it's a simple story of human acts, of someone who acts quite rationally, who is not a martyr of any religion, who is just doing his job. So this is the same story, recycled, reused again, in a different tone. And it, of course, it's more moving than the film. In the film, it's stupid. In the performance, it's something very, very touching, very human, very personal. So they are sometimes using, and their performances are very, very funny. You hear laughter all the time, because people are very, very amused by this game of different elements, confronting themselves. But sometimes there is a tone of seriousness and a real emotionally touching. The next performance that they did in Old Theatre was one of the greatest and most acclaimed theatrical event in our last season. It's called "I Will Tell Everything to the God," and it's based on the drama by the romantic writer Zygmunt Kosiński, that is called The Undivine Tragedy. It's a drama about the revolution. Kosiński, who was the aristocrat, wrote the drama about the revolution as the apocalypse. he thought about the revolution as a kind of apocalypse who is coming to his world and will destroy it, and everything will be destroyed. Of course, he put some historiographical ideas inside it, but never mind. Strzemka and Demirsky staged it as a contemporary drama. Of course, Demirsky rewritten it, adding many of his own materials. And it was staged as a contemporary drama about our today's situation, the situation of society who faces and feels that apocalypse is coming, but our world is close to the end. And there is a deep bitterness in the performance, because all the time the characters and the creators are looking for something, for some values, for some ideas, that will not help us to survive, because they say, no, we will not survive. Our apocalypse is now. But we are looking for ideas that will be even strong enough and worth to die for. And they cannot find anything. And this is the performance full of despair, full of bitter laughter. It's funny. Really, people are laughing all the time. But at the end, you face the deep despair and deep bitterness about with the question, what happened to our culture, what happened to our tradition, what we did with it. And in fact, it's a kind of attack on the tradition, but at the same time, again, we are left with the question, what are we now going to do with it? So this is the, let's say, field of reinterpretation. I would say also that this strategy of recycling, or let's say the other term that can be used here and sometimes is used, it's remixing the history. Remixing means using the ready the elements taken from other contexts and edited and composed in different ways, just like in a musical remix. You will hear the same tune, but in different arrangement, performed with different instruments, sung in different way. So this is, in fact, it's a new creation, but done with existing elements. And this idea of remixing was put into the title of a project proposed by the alternative company Komuna Warszawa, Commune Warsaw. You will meet them tomorrow. They will perform for you. 2 years ago, they proposed, 2 or 3 years ago, it lasted 2 years. It was a huge project called Remixes. They invited young artists, young independent artists mainly, from theater, from the field of dance, also from the visual arts, proposing them to do the remix of some important material from the past. On this picture you see the remix of Paradise Now by the Living Theatre, done by Komuna Warszawa, but there were different remixes. And of course the artists have freedom how they are doing these remixes, what they are using. Some of them proposed a kind of reconstruction. Some of them proposed their own narration about the important artists from the past that were important for them personally. There were many different tactics. The Theatre Institute published a book about remixes with many materials analyzing and interpreting all these projects. This project was really very, very important, maybe not so popular, but for the theater cycles, for the people from the field of performance studies also, it was really touching the very important point of the performance of memory, how you can enliven the memory by the means of performance. Can performance last, and how performance can last? You know, the most important notion, the most popular notion is that the performance is something unique, and after being performed, it vanishes. The idea behind this project of remixes was that it's not, but there are some traces, and you can work with these traces, you can remix them in your own way. There were also some remixes of important Polish artists, and this is the final part of my lecture, of two artists that were and still are very important and very problematic for Polish theater. This is the remix of a slide from the remix made by Wojtek Ziemiński, one of the most talented and inspiring artists working on the border between theater, performance art, and visual arts. And he remixed the remix. Maybe you heard about the performance that was called the Pool Theater, based on Acropolis by Laboratory Theater of Jerzy Grotowski. And Ziemiński somehow remixed this remix using special technical equipments. He added a new layer of this recycling, remixing series, posing the question about our relation and the relation between what we think and what we can do with the tradition of theater and this tradition. And I would like to devote the final part of my talk to the strong tradition of two outstanding figures of Polish theater. I mean Tadeusz Kantor and Jerzy Grotowski. Starting with Kantor. The problem with both of them, in fact, is that they were the creators of their own memories. During their lives, both Kantor and Grotowski did almost everything to create a kind of personal canon, of personal archive, of a way they should be remembered by next generation. Kantor, during his life, created his own museum. He called it Krykoteka. It was first housed in a mansion in Old Town in Krakow. But a year ago, in Krakow, there was a great opening of a new building of this museum. You see it on the slide. It's a very modern structure, quite impressive when you look from the outside, quite problematic when you went inside, because the space for the exhibition is not so huge. In fact, it's quite small. So for me, for example, I have this question: why you have such big stairs and so small room for the exhibition? But never mind. We also have a very good performing room, a black box, well equipped, and many things are done here. And the problem of management of Krykoteka and the problematic idea that is behind Krykoteka is how to, on one hand, preserve what was left by Kantor, his objects of his art, because also Kantor was a painter. So how you should preserve his legacy, his achievements, but at the same time working in such a way that you are not creating a typical museum, with boxes when you have the labels. This is the stage design for the dead class, and this is the costume for I Shall Never Return, and this is the sketch for something. In fact, when they opened the new Krykoteka, the exhibition looked like that. You entered the room, there was no sound, and there were objects from the performances, and it was like a graveyard. Like walking among the graves, here lies the dead class, here lies Wielopole, and so on. But during this year, the management made many efforts to invite new people to work on Kantor's tradition. And there is a very serious question: how it is possible to develop, to be inspired by such a strong tradition as a tradition of Kantor? Of course, the legend goes that Kantor was against all people who tried to copy him, showing that they are inspired by him, and so on and so on. Still, there are his actors, his comrades, let's say, who are also against such attempts to create something new with strong elements taken from Kantor. But there are some attempts. For example, the company Chorea, one of his performances you will see next, tried to work on the text by Cantor, not on the text of performances, it's important, but his theoretical texts. Theoretical is a bad word because Cantor wrote his manifestos and commentaries to the performances. He wrote them as a kind of poetry. And sometimes it's a very good literature, very strong poetry. So Paweł Pasini, who wrote and directed this performance, created a very strange, quite eccentric